and we're going to focus on head coaching vacancies. I'm a little surprised, Marcus, it hasn't moved as fast as it has. As we record this right now, Jacksonville has seemingly paused, not just even the organization, but the entire city, to wait to see what Urban Meyer does. And so we're going to break this up into a couple of places. Your best job in the NFL, your worst job, and then we want to talk about the top 3 candidates. And I was doing some digging right before it came out because this stuff moves so fast that trying to gather who's actually still available, specifically looking at my Jets, of course I am. So first and foremost, the best job available, I came down to 2 for me. So I'm very interested to get your take, but what is the best job currently open right now?
I think it's the Chargers job, right? You've got a franchise quarterback. You've got a ton of playmakers on defense. You've got weapons on offense, and you're living in Los Angeles, in a city that doesn't care about football, and you're in a division with, Patrick Mahomes. So the expectations are pretty low. So if the next coach can come in, develop Justin Herbert, and get them to the playoffs, I think everybody will agree that they've done a good job. So I really think a team with
such an amazing underhanded, backhanded compliment to the job. Just slapping.
But it is around. Right. If you can get this team to the playoffs, and again, there's 7 teams that make the playoffs every year, I think that's going to be considered a job well done. So I would love to live out in Los Angeles and coach Justin Herbert. That sounds fantastic.
Okay, I went with the Chargers also, and largely because of Herbert, but also because you've got one of the best pass rushers in football. Mm-hmm. Your receiving group is good. There's a lot there. You got a good
Derwin James is coming back next year.
Yes, the great point. Yeah, you've got a lot there. The Chiefs are the only thing that kind of stinks, but you're right. Expectations for a couple of years, and also they could have flipped that record around if the coaching wasn't so bad. Easily. So they're about there. Did you dabble with the Jag? Who would be, since we're both in consensus, who would be your number 2? For me, it was the Jags because of Trevor Lawrence, salary cap, draft equity. Right? Would that be your number 2 also?
Yep, exactly. And you're going to have a franchise quarterback. You're going to have endless amounts of cap space. The weapons really aren't that bad. Laviska Shenault was really good this year. I think a lot of people like DJ Chark. The offensive line could use some help, but it's not impossible to see how this could be a top 12, top 14 offense as soon as 2021. And again, I think there's a chance that by, let's say, the 2022 season, you already have the best quarterback in the division, because who knows what's going to happen to Deshaun Watson. Yeah, Phillip Rivers is a free agent this year. Ryan Tannehill's good, but I don't think he's a special quarterback. So if you have the best quarterback in the division, you have a bunch of draft picks over the next 2 years, you could turn that thing around pretty quickly.
Also, running back, they nailed it. Right, I spent some time in Illinois State. Love to see Robinson. That guy was awesome. I really like the pieces. The only difference for me is Herbert was so good, and we assume that Lawrence is going to potentially be that good or better, which I think is unfair. But Herbert is the guy, and when you have that guy, it's so vital that it becomes the deciding factor. Now, I say that I'm going to contradict myself almost immediately, and I'll go first with the worst job, and I think it's the Texans, because I think they have that guy right now. And Deshaun Watson, you mentioned the unhappiness that is really escalating. But if it's not for Deshaun Watson, this is a crater of a football franchise at the moment. The cap is a mess. They have no first-round pick. Watson is unhappy. I dabbled potentially with Detroit here, Marcus, but I just look at everything that a new coach is stepping into, and other than having this quarterback who is incredible right now, I just don't see a lot. It was a pretty actually easy choice for me, as weird as it is to do so with a franchise QB.
All right, so here's why I don't think the worst job is the Texans run. Because if you get the Deshaun Watson thing figured out, you've got a top 5 quarterback in the league, you've got an elite left tackle, and there's pieces on defense. And I know the cap situation is rough, and so are the draft picks, but having that elite quarterback makes a rebuild easier. I think the worst job out there right now is the Philadelphia Eagles job for a variety of reasons. And let's dive into them, right? They're over $70 million over the cap right now. So they're going to have to shed. They're going to have to shed a bunch of contracts. What doesn't help is they don't have a lot of young talent. Like, who are the cornerstones of this team? Because all of their good players are into the 30s and they have big contracts like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. Those are good players, but they're being paid at the top of the position, and they're getting a little older. then when you don't have a quarterback and you have a city and a franchise that is, they want to compete right now. We know that Eagle front office isn't patient at all. I mean, they just fired Doug Peterson, who won a Super Bowl, 4 years ago. So you're expected to come in right away and compete, with the heavyweights in the NFC. And I just don't see it. That roster is terrible. There's not a bunch of draft picks to help you out in the future. There's just no way that I would want that job.
I think that would be a high pressure, assuming and hoping we get fans in the stands. They're not going to be happy. No. Like that, if you're a head coach, you're like, that's a moment.
Well, and the other thing, Adam, is, I mean, if you're getting that job, it's most likely because you're telling the front office and the organization that I can fix Carson Wentz.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Right. So the expectation is that you're going to make Carson Wentz an elite quarterback again. And if I'm taking that job, I don't necessarily want to be tied down to just him.
It is amazing. I think that's a really good pick, by the way. And I think you kind of talked me into maybe bumping that up to number 2. It is amazing how fast things can turn if you don't manage your cap well and if you don't draft well. And they haven't done either, frankly. Right? I mean, this is a team that's missed on DK Metcalf and others. I mean, a lot of people did that. But this is a team that has not done that. And I really think the Wentz Jalen Hurts thing is just, my goodness,
it's a bad situation. And they have the 6th pick in this upcoming draft. They probably should consider using it at quarterback, right? If a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields is there. But I think this organization is just so tied to Carson Wentz, and it's hard not to be when you gave him that much money. So it's just a rough situation there.
And the fans will not be happy. Philly fans on Twitter are just my absolute favorite. Okay, on let's go to the other side of the interview desk and let's talk about top 3 candidates. So I'll kick it to you first. I would imagine we're going to have some crossover here. I want to know though, is Urban Meyer in your top 3?
No, and we talked about this last week, right? I think he's a little bit of a tease, and I think he's somebody that could come in for a few years and maybe build a culture, but I don't think he's a long-term solution. I just don't see it. I really don't. It's not like he's not bringing an innovative scheme on offense. His best thing is recruiting. That doesn't really work.
Doesn't the indecision already say a lot?
Exactly.
By the way, doesn't the fact that this is dragging out say a lot? It wouldn't be a bad hire, but actually leaving him out of my top 3 was pretty easy. And I want to say, the evaluation for this, and hopefully you're the same way. I'm thinking long-term, prolonged football guidance. The guy that you're going to hire, you're going to have there for 8 to 10 years, if such a thing even exists, I guess, in this day and age. So,
right, as I say, if you're going to go for a college quarterback, college head coach, I like Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern quite a bit better than what I like Urban Meyer.
I tell you, man, Pat has the flirtation, I think, has gone up. I don't think he should. I think he's got one of the best gigs on the universe, not just in football in general. I think he would have to be historically bad for a decade for them to consider firing him. And I think a lot of my friends in the area would be really sad about that, and it would be bad for them. But it does seem like the intrigue is starting to mount. I did not put Lincoln Riley on the topic of college potential candidates on this. I think he's happy. I did not include Ryan Day on this because I actually think he'd be a fantastic potential coach. I think he'd be great in the NFL. I love what I've seen from him. Did not include those guys on mine. So your list, 1, 2, 3. Why don't you go down yours? I'll give mine, and we can just do a little compare and contrast.
Yeah, so at number 3, I like Eric Bieniemy. I know there's a lot of people that believe it's just Andy Reid, and that's the reason for the success in Kansas City. Bieniemy's been around a long time. I would be willing to at least give him a shot. At number 2, I really like Robert Saleh. I think there's a specific type of team.
It's my number 2.
Yeah, I think there's a specific type of team he needs to go to, one that needs a tough leader. And I do think, maybe Detroit is a good spot for him. He's from that area. And then number 1, I like Arthur Smith a lot from the Tennessee Titans. I love what he's done with that offense. I love how he's helped Ryan Tannehill. They were really good over the last 2 seasons, despite not having a good offensive line. I just think he's one of these creative offensive minds that I want to give a chance to and give him a bigger role.
So some similarities, largely different though. So my number 3, I struggled with Bieniemy and Joe Brady. And I think Joe Brady is early.
Are you concerned about the age? Because he's pretty young.
Yeah, but I think in the NFL, you can kind of mask that by bringing in a couple of veteran coordinators. And just, if the name of the game is groom a quarterback and bring in this system, and like LSU is hiring people that he's tried to talk to over time, like this system was incredible. So I think if you're a team trying to go the Cliff Kingsbury path, and I understand it, like Kingsbury is probably a bad example because it has not really worked, but I understand it. And I think that's a guy that you could buy now and you'd be in a good position for the future, potentially. But again, I understand. I had Salah as too. Before we started recording this, he was interviewing with the Jets, and I'm like, come on, like close the deal. And of course, he's leaving, and that's never a good thing. Yep. Yeah, that's never a good thing if he's going. And then I had Brian Daboll at my number one. Again, a guy I got to know at Alabama a little bit. I just am a huge believer in his philosophy. I love that offense. It helps to have some great pieces that he's had, but the grooming he's done with Josh Allen, Sal was a bit of an outlier for me because it's it's an offensive time, and that doesn't mean you can't hire a defensive coach, right? And I wanted to ask you the same as you're looking at this. How was it hard for you, knowing where the game is and where it's going, to put in, the defensive minded coaches in there, given like the fact that these hugely successful situations, it seems like the coach and the QB are kind of glued hip to hip?
It is because it's really hard to keep a staff that's really good on offense. I mean, look at Mike Zimmer in Minnesota, right? He's been through, I don't know how many different offensive coordinators now, because anytime they're competent, they get interviews for head coaching jobs. So it is really difficult. There is one more guy that I wanted to mention, and I don't know if he's going to get a job or anything like that, but the one that I would interview is David Topp. He's a special teams coach in Kansas City. Every single year, Kansas City is among the league's best special teams in all phases of the kicking game. We've seen John Harbaugh, a special teams coach, be really successful. The special teams guy, they've got to be familiar with all 53 guys on the roster. They're all season long. They're working with new players and stuff. I just think he's really good, and he'd be somebody that I'd want to sit down with and have a chat for 4 or 5 hours about how would you plan on building a team and building a dynasty here?